You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
So excited today for this amazing conversation that we're going to have with Siawash, who is my business coach. And if you're struggling in your business or you're not, you're stuck with growing your business in any way, he's a person to listen to today. We're going to talk about everything coaching, whether it's business or other things around it that might stop you from moving your business forward and actually really serving people, because ultimately it's about our impact and service. And of course, it's one of those businesses where you can, at least I've been able to, can create a lifestyle that feels aligned with you, aligned with your values, your spiritual life, or your family life, and all that stuff. So we can potentially create an amazing life while serving a lot of people with this. And I know you want to do that. So we're really excited to have this conversation. Today, as you can see, Dr. Sherry is not here. She's actually in Kenya. She's gone there for a month. That's my co-host and business partner. She's actually helping I think a farming family with their business development. So she's actually volunteering for the month. She's taking her kids and everybody there, and she's doing something she loves. She's helping them with their business and volunteering there, but also continuing partly doing some of the stuff. So she couldn't be here. But she's always here with us in spirit. So let's jump in. Now, Siawash, great to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to invite Siawash, because we're both also serving coaches. And one of the things that I learned just the past few months, I got connected to Siawash through a referral, which is usually a good sign because people refer people who they've gotten value from, which is good for coaches in general. So maybe we'll talk about that too. But just the past few months, one of the biggest things I think I've realized working with Siawash and her team is to, the biggest thing from a human perspective, to really slow down. And I thought I was doing that already, but even on the business side, to really slow down and think through what we're doing and how we're connecting with people. And a lot of it became about connection and service, rather than, okay, let's move this marketing thing forward. But also then, the past few years, I've been trying to figure out, how does marketing and sales and all this stuff come together? It's like a huge puzzle, and half the pieces were in place, the other half was not in place. So I was doing the bigger stuff, and then I was doing none of some of the bigger stuff and the beginner stuff, and somewhere in the middle there were some holes in there. And I think Siawash helped me kind of put those together, and now I'm much more focused in my efforts and marketing and how I'm structuring my business and how I'm doing my sales calls. And also, Siawash has worked with some of the best people, some of the best coaches like Rich Litvin, Steve Chandler, and these guys, and also some people on the business side of things, to learn from them and really go towards that mastery and service and what we do. And he really cares about that impact piece too. So what we'll do, Siawash, we'll get started a little bit with your story. How did you get here? I know that your story is pretty interesting. You come from a poker background and you ended up in coaching. But just tell us how you got here, and then we'll take it from there.
It's interesting because I never planned to get into coaching, but being in coaching now for around 6.5 years, I realized that actually while I was playing poker, so at the age of 18, I dropped out of, secondary school, which was, my parents weren't happy with that because my plan was to go study medicine, become a doctor like my brother, right? That was always the dream. But I dropped out and I came home and I got into a poker game and fell in love with the game of poker, right? And it's interesting because, like Steve Jobs says, when you look back, you can connect the dots, right? It's while I was playing poker, I realized that, hey, you know what, to get really great at this, to make a living out of it and to become one of the best, I need people around me. I need coaches around me, right? I need mentors around me. I didn't know you really called it a coach back then, but I was looking for people that could help me, manage my emotions, because poker is a really intense game, right? I was looking for people that could help me perform more at a higher level, but also consistently at a higher level, right? And so I remember like actually just reading books around mindset, learning from people, getting feedback on how I was like structuring my day, how I was thinking about my work. So actually, it's interesting because poker was very much actually the start of my coaching journey, right? Because that's actually where I started to get support from coaches, but also I started to coach myself, right? Like I started looking at my day and really asking myself different questions that help me improve my performance. And there's a lot of similarities between the two, because both of them, I think, really, it's about both of them. There's a game element, there's there's psychology involved, there's some numbers involved, and more, I think at the core of both, it's a people's game, right? And obviously there's one big difference is poker is more about you playing against people, so you're understanding people so you can win the game. And with coaching, the beautiful thing is we're doing the opposite, right? It's about serving people and making a difference, right? It's both about people, but in a very different way. And that's personally why I love coaching, is because I can bring all those things that I learned in poker and put it into practice in a way that actually contributes to the world, that may, in a positive way.
Yeah. And I'm curious to hear. I think you've shared a little bit about this, and I love that distinction you made. That, I mean, it's the people's game, but one is for service, the other one might be just for competition, to gain something. Because a lot of times, like most coaches I've talked to, they've had this interesting period in their life where something has happened and that shifted their course. So I know for you it was a spiritual shift. To some degree, I don't know the full, but can you share a little bit about what made you shift more towards coaching and doing this versus just continuing on with poker?
So my plan was never to, like, I had a long-term plan to stay, right, to stay in that industry, because I really enjoyed poker. So I did that for around 4 years, made a lot of money with it, became really successful with it. What happened in 2010? I was traveling around the world, 5-star hotels, right? It was a bit of crazy lifestyle, right? Very, very different than it is right now. A young man just chasing girls, chasing money, right? And I met this girl from London, and I fell in love with her, but she was very different than everyone else. And her brother told me, look, if you want to marry my sister, you need to do two things. One is you need to give up on poker, and two, you need to, become a Muslim. And for me, it was like, what do you mean? I'm not going to give up on poker, and I don't know anything about Islam, right? I wasn't into religion. So I learned about that and just fell in love with it, right? Long story short, I fell in love with that way of life. It just brought a lot of purpose and happiness and peace into my life, right? And so I slowly started considering actually giving up on poker. It just changed my relationship with how I saw the world, right? So I gave up on poker. Again, there's a lot that happened there between coaching and poker. I think there was like around 5.5 years. And in those 5.5 years, a lot of people don't know that, right? I went from someone that was making maybe like 20,000 a day to 10,000, sometimes on average between like 10, 20,000 a week, right? Some days were like, sometimes those weekly numbers were my daily numbers, right? To basically working in a supermarket for £8 an hour, right? And living in London, that meant like I barely had any money, right? So I was living on noodles for 3.5 years, right? And by the way, like my parents and my family didn't know that. Like sometimes they were sending me a little bit of money, but I didn't really ask for much. I thought, you know what, let me rebuild things. And at one point, at the lowest point, I lived in a basement, right, with 3 guys with no windows and a mouse. We had one little mouse running around, and it was just funny, right? I remember like this is around the time I met my wife. She helped me, rebuild things in a different way. But yeah, that's the crazy thing. It's like in between that time, I was just figuring out, I went to around like, I did around 15 jobs, right? Just because with every job I would excel, and, you know, they didn't really want to give me promotion, or they didn't want to pay me more. So they said, you know what, you probably like should look for something better. That's kind of how it ended up with almost every job, right? It's like, look, you got a lot more potential. You should go do something else. You don't belong here. And in fact, I remember this one story. I posted about this on Facebook. I've worked I was working as a fishmonger, right? Cleaning fish, cutting fish at a supermarket. And I remember one lady came to me and we had a conversation. It was a regular customer. And she told me, look, I don't want to offend you, but she said, I pay my cleaner more than you're earning, and you're really intelligent. You shouldn't be working here. And I was just constantly getting these messages because in a way, I was just settling, right? For a few years, I just settled. I thought, you know what? I'm really happy. I'm really peaceful, right? I found this like new way of life. But I knew like I had a lot more potential. I love what Abraham Maslow says, right? Like what one can be, one must be. And in the way that if we're not really tapping into our full potential, right, it creates anxiety, it creates like depression, right? So while I had that, there was something in me also like constantly just niggling, like, you know what, like if I can create that in poker, I'm sure I can create something similar in a, you know, in a way that is in alignment with my new way of life, right? So just for those that don't know, like in Islam, you know, like gambling is not permissible, right? And there's wisdom behind that, right? And when I really started reflecting on that, I thought, you know what, there's better things to do for me, because in poker, like while I was making a lot of money, you know, it didn't feel good because I was winning people's salary, like people's savings. Some people would put their savings in, some people lost their house, people lost their marriages, right? So it's affecting people in a different way. And so I thought, you know what, there's a better way to do things. And that's when I tried different businesses. I tried to get into property, but didn't really have much money to get into it. I tried affiliate marketing, network marketing. Network marketing had a really positive impact on me, right? Because that's when I got back into personal development. I started reading a lot of books, went to trainings. And it's funny because I hired a coach initially to help me grow my network marketing business. I paid him £3,000. And so just to put that into context, my salary was 1,000 a month. My wife's salary was 1,500. And that's 2,500. And after 1 week, we had no money left, right? So 3 weeks, we were just kind of like trying to survive. And sometimes like I would joke to my wife, it's like, look, we got, you know, your mom, your uncle, my auntie, let's just go to their houses and make sure we have dinner, right? Like they didn't know, like they laughed at, you know, people loved us coming over, but you know, like it was just a way of like surviving. And so with my first coach, he's like, it's £3,000. And I asked him, can you make me like a special offer or a discount? And he said, there's no discount. If you really want this, you need to find a way, right? And I want to share this because a lot of times people think that, you have to get it all together, right? Like I asked 10 people just to pay that deposit, and most people just came back to me and said, no, I can't help you, which is quite embarrassing, right? Like couldn't get 1,000 together. And then one of my friends, he said, look, I got the money. And only 6 months later, I found out that he went to 5 of his friends and got 200 from each one of them for his deposit, right? And that's kind of like how it started, right? And the funny thing is, this guy, you know, I'm so grateful to him. He wasn't really like a proper coach. He was just more like, you know, I love this guy. What's his name? This guy, Eric Thomas. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's like a motivational guy, like similar to Les Brown. And you know, it's like this coach was very much like an American coach, like really just trying to like motivate me, and you know, constantly telling me like, dude, I love you. You have so much potential. You know, you can make this happen. But it was just that. There wasn't much like coaching, like asking questions, creating that space. But he was doing something, right? He was kind of like he was creating like a shift within me to believe in myself.
Yeah.
And then I asked him, like, how many clients do you have? He's like, yeah, I got 10 clients. I'm like, so you're making 30K just doing this? I can do that stuff.
I can tell people what to do.
Yeah, and he was just motivating me, right? Like, and I was like, I can motivate people. But then, for 2 months I struggled like crazy. And then I told my wife, like, I don't think this coaching thing is gonna work, because what he got me to do, I mean, you talked about marketing earlier. Like, he told me, look, if you want to build your coaching business, you have to post 5 times a day, right? This is 2016, October 2016. He said, post 5 times a day on Facebook, go live every single day for 90 days. He said, you're not allowed to miss one day, otherwise we're going to stop our work, right? And I was like, what do I talk about? He's like, I don't care. You just have to do this 5 times posting, live every day, right? And he said, people just need to know you. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like share stuff. And funny enough, things start moving. I started getting like coaching conversations. Like, I'll start getting more and more calls, but I wasn't enrolling anyone. And here's the amazing thing, right? Like, I went to his house for a coaching session, and I kind of just thought, like, you know what, like, this guy is like, I like him, I appreciate him, but everything he's sharing with me is just not making a difference, right? And so I love books, and I was looking at his bookshelf. He had this book. It's called The Prosperous Coach, right? So I looked at it and I said, hey, this looks really nice. I took a picture of it and I said, did you have, tell me about this book? And he was like, yeah, I don't know about that book, right? And I ordered the book. I started reading the book, and within like 40 days, I got 15 paying clients. So I went from doing like discovery sessions for 30, 40 minutes to doing what the book talks about, to doing 2-hour coaching sessions. And at the end, I would just ask people, like, would you like to continue with me? And they're like, yeah, like, we had a great session. So no clients to 15 clients. And that's like, each client was paying me 1,000. So I made like 15 times my monthly wage, right? So I quit my job.
Yeah.
I think I got like 4 clients and maybe like 4 or 5 calls booked while I was in the job. But then I thought, you know what, if I can do this part-time, get 4 clients part-time, I can crush this. And I quit my job, and I got like 10, 11 clients in a really short period within that 30, 40 days. And then I was like, wow, this is going to be fun, right?
Yeah. That's incredible. So I'm curious, because there's so much in there. I don't know which direction to go in, because I'm excited about all of them. But I will ask you a couple of things. So first of all, I'm curious, why do you think he never? Because Prosperous Coach is one of my favorite books in the coaching world too. Why do you think he never recommended that book?
Well, I to be honest, I don't know if he actually read it, right? Like, I don't know if he
Probably
actually
didn't read it.
The thing is, it goes against what most people do online, right?
Yeah.
So, and also, even like in a year and a half later, I did my first coaching school. I did my coaching diploma. Even then, like, at the end of the coaching diploma, they were teaching us like to do 30-minute, 40-minute discovery sessions, right? So what he was teaching me worked for him, right? But like what this book was talking about is like spending 2 hours just coaching, not selling, right? And so, like, a lot of times, like, when I shared with people like what I'm doing, they were like, you're wasting your time, right? Even my wife was like, I don't think that's a smart idea to just give people like 2 hours, right, for free. Yeah. So it kind of goes against, I think, like, what most people think you should do.
Yeah, and that was actually very interesting for me, because when I joined you guys, I turned mine into, I was doing 90-minute sessions before, and I kept going over anyway. So when and I had read it in Prosperous Coach, I'm like, oh, okay, let me try 2 hours. That actually had a better result for me. And every time I talk to coaches, it's the same hesitation. It's like, oh, well, then maybe you should do a 1 hour. Maybe you should do 45 minutes. Maybe you should. And I tell them, like, I've tried it all. I've tried 60 minutes. I've tried 90 minutes. I've tried 2 hours. I think it comes down to we feel like we're going to give away something that will not get them to sign up, but the effect is actually the opposite.
Yeah. The thing is this, right? When there's resistance to doing that, usually it's because we're thinking transactionally, right? So, like, I'll share like some distinctions that really help me like grow my business. And one of them is the difference between transaction and relationship, right? And so most of us, like when we do business, we're very transactional. It's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna spend an hour and this is what I'm getting in return.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and by the way, like when I first learned the Prosperous Coach way, I was actually like just seeing it as another strategy to get clients. So in a way, it was still a little bit transactional, right? Because what starts happening, like even if you do it that way, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and you get frustrated, right? It's only later, I joined Steve Chandler's. So Steve is one of the authors, right, of the book. I joined this coaching school, and that's when it really starts shifting for me. Is that serving people is not just a way to, build a business and get clients. It's a way of like, yes, sometimes we start like that, like it's like doing, but that's more like surface level, right? It's more really powerful when we become that, right? And it becomes a way of just being, right? And just to give you an example of that is that, and this is the paradox, right? In business is that when we all want clients, we all want money, and you should like desire that, because otherwise, you're in business to make money, to make a profit, right? So you can, most of us do that so we can provide for our families, right? But we have different reasons, but otherwise we can just run a charity. But here's the thing, like that desire for money, we need to put it aside, because if we constantly thinking about wanting money, wanting clients, actually you're going to struggle more. So the paradox is that actually, if you focus on serving people really powerfully and you just focus on the process, and to be honest, that's also the thing that's in your control, right? So if you do a great job coaching people, right, it's very likely that at the end of that call, the person will ask you, like, how can I hire you? How can I work with you? And sometimes if they don't ask, you can ask them like, hey, was this useful for you? And they will say, yeah. They will share like what's happened. And then you can ask them like, would you like to know how we can work together? Right. So what happens here. So we want to focus on service and like almost like detach from the outcome. Right. And the better we get at this part, the more people actually end up working with us. So we make more money, we get more clients by actually shifting our focus towards service. Right. But again, it has to be professional service, right? Like if you just keep giving like everyone 2 hours of your time, and you don't know how to enroll people, right? And you don't make proposals, like you don't tell them, you don't ask them that question, right? Like, how would you like to work with me, right? You're going to be a broke coach that's in service. That's also like, that's again, like really good, important to understand, right? It's because, I don't know who, I think there's a guy called Adam Grant. He wrote a few good books. And in one of his research, he shows that he found out in his research that the 10% most successful people are givers, right? So most of us, we think like, oh, I need to be a giver, right? But also like the top, like the bottom 10% of people are givers.
Are also givers.
Yeah. And so I've met people that say, you know what, I love the Prosperous Coach, and they're like struggling, they're broke, like they don't make money. And sometimes they're really good coaches. I've had clients, right? We have this one client, she still works with us. 8 years in, she was like struggling as a coach, and she's really good. She's done a bunch of certifications, really good, but struggling financially. And it's because she didn't get that professional part right. Meaning that, you can't just go around and giving to people without actually receiving, right? The receiving part is part of the professional coach, right? Yep. Otherwise, you're not like, it's the same with a dentist, right? It's not something new. The thing is, we often separate it and think that this is like a whole new thing, but it's the same with a dentist. It's the same with a physiotherapist, right? Doctor, they're all the same. They will just like, they will treat you and then they will bill you. They will just tell you like how much it is.
Yeah, they do. And this was really challenging for me when I was starting out. Like there's a lot in there in terms of our thinking process, because a lot of things come in. There's our money issues will come in there. Our lack of ability to make proposals will come in there. Our lack of skill sets in sales will come in there. But for me to even, for example, when I was struggling with this, in the beginning, I was in the bottom 10%. Like I really wanted to serve people, but I was just doing that. I wasn't really making clear proposals. I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know any of that stuff, but I wasn't even motivated to learn that stuff, because in my mind, at some level, that was a negative thing. I just cared, but I had to work this stuff out, partly because I went through a lot of coaching, but partly I had to really make sense of it in my own being, like, how does this align with my values? So I found all sorts of weird ways to make sense of it. So you know what I would do? When I would make proposals, I wasn't making proposals to people. I was making proposals to God, to be honest. It sounds odd, but I'm like, that's a gift from God for me to serve in the world. To me, that worked out very well. And to this day, like that has stayed with me, is that's just a gift God gives me for doing what matters to me, what the potential that He's given me to serve. And but I had to work out. Now, I'm not saying everybody should think like that, because people will have different ways of looking at this. But I had to find my own ways of doing it. But as soon as I was able to kind of deal with the mental hurdle and the psychological hurdle, then I was more motivated to learn more about sales, about proposals, and all the other things that you need to understand to be able to even sell coaching. So it was in your view, how can people deal? Because that money part is a big problem for a lot of coaches, because coaches generally are service oriented. They are impact driven. But then, and I always say that if you take out the money component from coaches, I think they'd be the best salespeople. As soon as you bring in money into it, they screw up.
Yeah, no, I think like it is, and I struggled with that as well. I think what helped me and what's helped a lot of like the coaches I've worked with is seeing that, okay, service, like there's different levels of service, right? So you can serve someone for an hour or 2 hours. And I learned this really from Steve Chandler, so credit goes to him. He said like the biggest level of service is a paid relationship, or the highest level of service. And that's it. Like just writing that down and looking at that again and again, connect to that. The highest level of service and impact happens within a paid relationship, right? So like, here's the thing, like if you think about it, like you can have one coaching conversation. And by the way, like in general, we have a fun rule, in our coaching school, is when we say you're not allowed to make a proposal in the first session, right? So it's like, I always compare it to dating. It's like, don't ask the girl like to come home with you at the first date, or don't ask her to get married, right? She'll freak out. And the thing is this, right? In general, like we want to treat it like that. Like, so even if you know, like you want to spend the rest of your life with this person, right? You're already in love. I think I love this show. It's called How I Met Your Mother, right?
I do too.
I think that's what's the main guy's name?
Ted.
Yeah, Ted. Yeah. Sometimes I confuse it with Ross from Friends, but
similar shows.
Similar, yeah. But Ted does that mistake, right? Like first date, he's like, "I love you," and then, he messes it up, right? It's similar with coaching. I think it's like you might know, like, hey, this could be a great client. I can help this person, and the client might even feel like that, and they might even express that, but we still want to slow things down, right? So ideally, again, this is not like a rule. Sometimes it works, but in general, 2 or 3 sessions, that's the best thing. That's the best thing you can do.
So help me clarify that. So if I were to go towards like the sales process, so I do. I mean, I didn't even go in through your sales process, but that's what ended up happening anyway for me. But I think one of the things that became interesting for me is that I kind of released expectation, because most of the sales like coaches, and I did have a sales coach and other trainers that taught me, like they came from a very sales mentality that you need to close on the call. And I never felt aligned with that. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because I've had so many calls where I didn't close there, but then they ended up signing up a week later. I just made sure I followed up with them and everything. And every time I would bring that up, they're like, no. Well, what if you did do that? You would have more sales. Like maybe, I don't know how to prove or disprove that. But then when I started kind of doing this, the way, so for example, in most cases, even if I get a referral, I'll meet the person for a few minutes, for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I just get to know them a little bit. And then I would do a 2-hour session now. And sometimes I don't even end the proposal there. And I tell them, like, let's talk about it in another 20, 30-minute call. So it ends up being 2-3 calls by the time the sales moves forward. And I want them to feel like they're making a decision long-term rather than kind of short-term jumping into it, which works very well for retention, because if they are not fully invested and they just made a rash decision, more than likely they're going to ask for their money back as well. And
exactly, yeah, it creates like buyer's remorse, right?
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, like it's important for us coaches to understand like a bit of like the psychology behind that, right? That when we slow down, it creates more safety. For us, sometimes it doesn't feel like a big commitment, right? Like, oh, someone's spending 5,000 on 3 months of coaching or 6 months. But the way you have to look at it is just like they're committing, not just money, they're committing time, they're committing to be with you, right? So, and so what happens usually, naturally, as we talk about money, right, there's fear coming up, right? There's insecurity coming up. So one of the things this does is by spending more time, we just naturally create more safety. Also, like, and here's the thing, like, I got like great examples of this where I've met coaches that had like a full calendar, right? Met this one coach, she was doing well in terms like meeting people, booking them in and making proposals, but she was struggling. Like people were saying, I loved the coaching session, but they were saying no. And we just made this one change. Like I asked her, like, how many conversations do you have with someone before you make a proposal? And she said, well, I always sell on the first call. And I only gave her this one little challenge. I said, okay, from now on, spend 2 to 3 sessions with people. And she made that one change. And I even invited her to go back to like 4 or 5 people. In the last few weeks before our conversation, she made like 4 or 5 proposals. I told her, go back to those people, invite them again. Right. And she signed up a bunch of people like straight away. And the thing is this, right? Like, we talk about this, like this theory around like it being a relationship business, right? People feel that when you slow down, people feel that. And also like when you have 2 coaching sessions or 3 coaching sessions, there's things happening in between the sessions. This is the power of coaching is not just within the coaching container, like within the coaching.
Much of it is outside, actually, in their own realization.
Exactly. Because if you coach someone, for example, on, how they see their world, they can experience their world in a different way in that week. Or, if you coach them on the relationship, they're going to notice differences in their relationship. Like often when I coach people on their business, between the first, second, and third session, they're signing up clients. I had one guy sign up a 40K client before he even paid me. And it's happened a lot of times that something happens. And the thing is, we don't want to be focused on like pushing results, but it's being focused on creating impact, right? And I learned this like a long time ago at a workshop. It's like the higher you charge, the more you charge, the more impact you need to create upfront, like before you make the proposal. And that was really interesting because it's at that time where I had a full practice and I was like upping my prices, right? And I thought, okay, I'm getting a bit more resistance. So I thought, okay, how do I create more impact? Right. And here's the thing, the idea behind this is, right, like, because some people might hear this and they're like, oh, this is a great strategy. I'm going to do 2 coaching sessions, 3 coaching sessions, right? And here's the thing, like, it didn't work exactly like, it didn't work perfectly at the beginning for me. And the reason is because in every session, my mindset, like I was focused on enrolling this client, right? And here's what happens when you're focusing on enrolling someone, you're showing up differently. So I was trying to impress the client. I was pleasing them, right? I was trying to win them over. All those things, right, that are kind of creepy, right? And I was in between, I was coaching them a little bit, but I was just really thinking about like, how do I get them to say yes? How do I get them to enroll? Maybe like, oh, let me share like this story about this client, which wasn't relevant, but I was just like, I need to show this person I'm like really good at what I do. And what happens when you do that is you're doing very little coaching and you're doing a lot of talking. One of the things I do, like when I teach people about this, is like we have a whiteboard and we put on in the middle, right? When you're we put a line in the middle. So imagine there's a line in the middle and on one side it says trying to enroll people. And this is what you do when you try to enroll. And everyone can do this exercise for themselves. What I was doing, I was like trying to impress them, trying to win them over. I was pleasing them. I wasn't challenging them, right? So I was holding back, right? I was trying to doing all these things just to win someone over, right? And then on the other side, the change really happened. And this is really, by the way, like the core philosophy of the prosperous coach. A lot of times people miss that. Richard Ledwin says in the book that if you would record me, you wouldn't see a difference between me working with a paying client and me being in an enrollment conversation. And that's where the magic happens. And there's a great book by Patrick Lencioni. It's called Getting Naked. where he does exactly the same with corporate companies. So this really applies to corporate. I've helped clients like, close really big deals, and they say like, oh, what should I do? Like I have a conversation with the CEO and I say, just go coach them as if they've paid you already. So you want to like make a proposal for 65,000, act as if they've paid you already. And that's how one of our clients got a 65,000 pound deal, by just acting as if he's paid already. So the difference here is when I start doing that, everything shifted, and I dropped all my all that stuff that I was doing went out of the window. And I was like, you know what? It felt so good because I didn't need to like, be so conscious of like, am I saying the right thing? Am I like, are they liking me? I just went on and thought, you know what? If I'm coaching, let's say if I'm coaching Amanda, I'm just going to act like Amanda's paid me 10,000 already, right? What am I doing here? Like, how can I make this session really impactful, right? What homework can I give her, right? That would be really useful for her. And, when there's a situation, look, if someone has paid you already, you don't need to impress them anymore, right? If someone has paid you, you don't need to like please them. And again, this is sometimes help. We all do this a little bit, but this is like, as we evolve as coaches, like we want to serve our clients. So it's like, we don't need to hold back thinking like, oh, if I say this, they're not going to sign up. So there's a lot of little things that change. So on this other side,
wait, before you go forward, because there's a lot in there, and there's a very powerful point there. And I always this was a huge realization for me, and actually I got it from Rich Littman. We're basically marketing his book, to be honest. This whole episode is about the Prosperous Coach, which I've done a lot. That's one of the, like, whenever I talk to new coaches, have you gotten the book? No, that's the first thing you need to do. And we do that because he has served in that book, because he changed my perspective. And I think one of the reasons why I signed up also with the Siawash was because he was talking the same language. Because I had been following that for a while. So, and this is the part that's like, what you're saying is so powerful, but in practice is actually very hard to do. It's very simple, but in practice it's actually very, very hard to do when you're not aware of it. Because what ends up happening, like, and it comes down to awareness. Because when we're sitting there with a client, we might even not be thinking consciously that we're enrolling the client, but we might have gotten there with that energy, and we're not aware of it in that moment. And this is why I always encourage my clients, like the coaches that I work with, you need to listen to your calls over and over. Listen to your tonality. Listen to are you actually challenging them? Are you actually asking them deeper questions? Are you just giving them advice and telling them what to do? Are you going deeper? Are you really interested in their life? Or are you just finding some tools to give them so they can sign up with you? That creates a very, very different energy. And then one of the phrases that has stuck with me from Rich Littman in the book was, like he simply said, if you really want to be really good as a coach, if you want to serve people, because my thinking was, okay, I need to figure out the business stuff because I don't know how to do this stuff. But he said, was like, no, just coach, and coach. Like, you need to be in coaching calls constantly. And a lot of coaches have this misconception, is that they've just gone through a certification. They're just going to jump in and start charging $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. It'll be just fine. But there's a lot that happens in coaching sessions that you need to review and give yourself feedback. And on top of that, you need to have feedback from other people that are in the coaching world, because a lot of times we get stuck in our own bad habits. That's one of the reasons in our community, one of the things we do is, even though we work through the business and marketing side of things, but our focus is you need to get feedback on your coaching process from other coaches and from your clients. If you're not getting feedback, you don't know what's actually happening. You don't even know if you're serving them. You might have just gotten lucky with one or two clients.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can do all of the things I said, but if your coaching is like, and again, this is about being honest, right? A lot of coaches, when you ask them, how good are you? They're like, yeah, I'm an 8 out of 10. And I used to think like I'm an 8. I think probably in my first 6 months, I was like 4 out of 10. Yeah. It was more like motivational stuff, like than coaching, right? But that's the thing, like all of this stuff.
You need to get your life in order. If you don't do that by next session,
yeah, exactly. So the thing is this, right? Like all of the stuff we talked about previously, like focusing on relationships, spending 2-3 sessions, all of that works, but at the core of it, you have to be good at what you do. So that's why I love what you're doing with the Coaching Mastery community, right? Because you can do this to a certain extent by yourself, by just slowing down and asking, like, after every question. I've been asking that for 6.5 years, right? What went well? What can I do better? What did I learn from this coaching session? But when you have a coach, when you have, someone else that can give you feedback, it's a lot more powerful, because we don't see our own blind spots, right? So that's really important, because, when people say like, well, I've read the book, I've tried all this stuff, it doesn't work for me, it's because most likely, like, the coaching is not impactful, right?
Yeah.
The coaching is not impactful. And, so that's probably like, like, here's the funny thing, right? Sometimes, like, it's a bit annoying, like, but, Steve Chandler, his school was about, acquiring clients, like creating clients, right? But one of the things he would keep coming back to is like how good you are as a coach, right? And there's a book that I don't think a lot of coaches read, right? It's not your like typical personal development book. There's two books that I think every coach needs to read that's really serious about making this like a profession. And both of them are by Cal Newport, right? One of them is called Deep Work, and one of them is called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And here's the thing, I have that book, like, I have a library in the sitting room, and I have the book facing forward, meaning that I can just see the title. And here's the thing, you could go and just, for people that listen to this, the books are both of them like, it takes you hours, like on Audible, I think each book is like 6 to 8 hours. But here's the thing, you could go and just watch a book summary and get the big ideas from this. I do recommend you to read these, but here's the idea behind the core philosophy of both books, right? That you have to create time to go really deeper on and become a master of your craft. And that's why I really enjoy, I really love what you're doing there with the coaching mastery, because most programs, business programs, they just focus on like, sales, marketing. And that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I was doing different, because you can learn everything around sales and marketing, right? But if your product is not good, people are not going to like come back to you, right? It's the same with a movie. You can have this huge budget, but if your storyline is crap, like, it's not gonna like perform very well, right? And so it's coming back to this, like, how good is my product? And your product is you, right? It's your coaching, your coaching skills. How well are you coaching people, right? How good are you at all those basic things, like holding space, being present, asking those, tough questions, challenging your clients, right? Provoking their thinking.
So this is really cool. I really love this. Even when you talked about rating yourself, we have a huge internal bias with this stuff. So depending on how our psychology is, somebody might be really hard on themselves. They will rate themselves 2. Somebody might be really over exaggerating. They might say 8 or 10. They might not even be dishonest. It might be just that's their perception of it. So for me, I realized that when I actually got this contract with another coach, and because he was just running out of time, and he's like, "Can you coach my clients?" He had seen some of my work. He's like, "Do it." And what he did was, the first 5-6 sessions, he listened to them and he gave me feedback. But when I did those 5-6 sessions, I was struggling, to be honest. I thought I was a good coach, but and I had worked with some clients at certain different levels, but these guys were at a very high level. A lot of the things that I would get them to think about, they had already thought about it. Yeah. They were very big in personal development. They had done a lot of work. They're very experienced. They were successful in a lot of ways. So, and then when we would go to the feedback process, well, it's difficult because this coach, which I'm really thankful, he's very direct. Just as a personality, and he would be like, this is he wasn't even kind about it. So he would be like, listen, I listened to that part, you asked this question, I was cringing about this. And like, why did you ask that question? Oh, what the fuck? And I'm like trying to put myself together here. And then I had to go back and listen to all these calls. After about 5 or 6 calls, he felt good about it. He's like, okay, you do it, but listen to your calls. And I did that for the next, I think 100 calls. I was listening to my calls. And it is hard to listen to your calls. It is very hard to listen to. A lot of coaches don't realize. It's also very, like, at times I'm listening to it, I'm like, why am I asking? Why am I still talking about this? Why am I still going on about this? But at times I didn't even notice. I'm like, that was a really profound question that I asked. That was a good way to challenge him, but I didn't even notice it while I was doing it. And coaches, like your clients won't give you that feedback. The kind of feedback your clients will give you is they will stop working with you or they will refer you to somebody. That's how you know. And this is why I think one is constantly being on the three things that really help me is one, giving yourself feedback consistently, really listening to the calls, because ultimately how good you are is dependent on what kind of results you create and what happens in those sessions. And then getting feedback from other coaches, and that's my other thing. I always share this is that when I'm in a coaching session, I'm not the only one there. There are 100 other coaches with me because I've listened to other coaches' calls. I've gotten feedback from them. I've tried to understand what they do differently from different modalities. And then also the third would be is like really getting so give yourself feedback, get feedback from other coaches, and get social proof. This is good for your marketing anyway, but your clients will tell you in their testimonials and when you interview them, when you ask them, like, what did you gain out of it? Like, we've been working together for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. They will give you the language that you can share. In fact, one of the things I love what you guys do is sharing the testimonials before the enrollment call. And like I started liking that process because when I've done that, I basically tell them like, I'm sharing this with you so you know, is this the kind of growth you're looking for? Because there are certain patterns that you're going to help clients with. Every coach has their own strengths. And I want them to know, like, is this the kind of growth they're looking for, or are they looking for a different kind of? Because my work is not like you said, the motivational kind of thing. I like going deeper. I like going into people's perceptions, into their beliefs, into all areas that they don't actually, into their emotions. They don't normally touch, and most coaches won't go there. So really your clients need to ultimately tell people like what you have done for them. And if you don't have that, then you need to get to work to coach people and get those results consistently. So I just wanted to kind of share that because it's very hard for us to kind of rate ourselves without this kind of feedback process.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant. Look, last Wednesday, I'm part of a men's group. It's great. I've been part of it 2 years, and there's a lot of like successful entrepreneurs in that, right? 6-7 figure entrepreneurs. And they asked me, I'm actually one of the clients in the group, but they asked me to run a session. And the session was called, they wanted me to do a session on how poker has helped me in my business, right? And this is exactly one of the things I talked about, because in poker, I used to play 6-7 hours a day. And each day I would spend at least an hour, 2 hours replaying like big hands. We used to have like, I don't know what you call it, but we had a little program that would record the screen, right? We didn't have Zoom back then and all that stuff. Like we just had a program that would record a screen so I could replay big hands. And this is what you're saying there. Look, a lot of times, and I put my hand up, right? Like when I started coaching early years, I was looking for shortcuts all the time. What are the secrets to like building a successful practice? What are the shortcuts, right? And the thing is, like, a lot of people listen to this and they might just miss this. So I want to just emphasize again, these are the shortcuts. These are what makes you really successful, right? Like the thing is, like, I've studied so many 6 and 7 figure coaches, especially coaches that have built a business based on kind of what we talk about, based on this a relationship approach, right? And mostly like with small number of high paying clients rather than the whole marketing approach, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, what works like better for most coaches is doing it this way. And the thing is, I've interviewed a lot of those coaches, I've studied them, and you can see this, they all have this in common. They're really good at what they do. They also have a good life, right? So they're always looking at improving the different areas of life. So if you think about the wheel of life, they're looking at, optimizing their health, their relationship. It's usually not that one, like that they're just only good in business or at coaching. They usually look after other areas. They're constantly improving, right? So they walk their talk.
Yeah.
Right. And again, so that part is so important. In fact, it's so important that I think, as coaches, you need to have like a system for improving your coaching, right? One part of that system can be to get feedback, to maybe be part of like, a triad, like, you do that, right? In your community. is actually like making sure that you're reading at least an hour a week or something, like a coaching book, not just self-help books. A lot of coaches just, they post on Facebook, I finished 50 self-help books this year, and they're still struggling. Yeah, sometimes it's okay to read those books, right? But you have to have that like a system. And here's the definition of a system, right? Like another distinction that really made a big impact on me is getting this clear on what is an intention and what is a commitment, right? And like Steve would share this example, right? Like, and I use it all the time in my business. It's like, you can say like, oh, like I want to make $100,000 in 2023. Like this year, I want to make 100, or I want to make 250, whatever that number is. And then sometimes we speak with people at the end of the year and they say like, you know what, it didn't happen. Like I only made like half of that, right? And then when you ask them like, show me your calendar, you don't see much in their calendar. And with coaches that are doing really well, their calendar reflects that, right? And so the difference between that intention, like intentions are great. Like we need to have intention. Like my intention is to be a great coach, to be of service, to make like a certain amount of money, but there needs to be commitments, right? And the way Steve defines commitment is that there's a system in place that guarantees the outcome.
Yeah.
Now some people might be listening to this like, well, how can I guarantee the outcome, right? Not the outcome of how much money you earn, because that's not in your control. But for example, we want to focus on the things that are in our control. Like part of my system could be, I have an hour in my calendar that says, build a relationship with 5 people, or start a conversation with 5 people. If I do that every single day, I will end up like having a lot of coaching conversations in my calendar, right? I could have 30 minutes in my calendar every day, read a coaching book. That's a system, right? Go to the gym.
Yeah, and those systems, and we can also say those are also commitments that turn into habits. They are actually very hard to implement, and most of what we do in coaches, we're actually helping people to create systems in their life. Once in a while, nothing makes the biggest difference. Like if you're reaching out to people once per month, that's not going to make the biggest difference. If you are, and this is something actually Brendan Burchard taught me early on too, is that if you're going to do coaching, you need to be involved in the process of coaching every day. Whatever you're doing, you need to be doing something. Whether you write a blog post, whether you work with a client, ideally you're actually working with a client, or if you don't have clients, you're doing something to move that forward every day. Not once a week, not once a month, like every day, because it changes your psychology when you do that. It helps you develop those habits. And we understand that as habits, what happens. There was a really profound point even before this that you shared that I want to kind of break, because a lot of coaches struggle with that area. I think around, hold on, don't forget this point. It was really important. Yes, modeling what you're, and this is something I think I read that in Prosperous Coach as well, where I think it was Rich Littman that says that you can't take your clients where you haven't gone yourself, something along those lines. And so a lot of coaches think what that means is that, oh, you can't work with wealthy people. No, well, I'm not as wealthy as them. You can. But what they're referring to is that you need to be battling the things you're gonna ask or challenge your clients to battle with. So if you want to challenge them in their relationships, you better have made an effort in there consciously every day. If you're challenging them in terms of their business, it doesn't mean you need to have the same level of business. It just means that you need to battle with that thing. That you're doing that. If you're challenging them in terms of their productivity and thoughts, you need to be doing that. If you're doing it in terms of their health, you need to be doing that, because there's a huge incongruency that gets created, and we subconsciously don't challenge people. Think about the sessions you've had where you've hesitated to challenge. More than likely, you're not doing much in that area, or you kind of doubt yourself in that area, and not in the sense that you're not perfect, but in the sense that you're not making as much effort that you could make in that area. And that is like, you're the zero client. If you're not doing more work on yourself, it's very, very hard to get challenge other people. And also the processes that you grow with your clients, I think of working with my clients as a healing journey. I don't pretend to be the person that knows everything. I'm going on this journey with them. And a lot of times I think of it this way. So initially we're just, it's not like, oh, I'm leading them somewhere. I'm just literally holding their hands let's go into this dark pit that we might both initially, they'll be scared, but at some point I'll be scared as well, because there are times, and this is really important. There are times I've taken clients through, like I've taken them through this visualizations where they go to their life where I'm dealing with that shit and I'm struggling to take them through it. But I'm like, I've started this and I can't end it. And I still remember I did this one, it was an inner child thing that I did where I took them back to their past and then moved them forward. But this client's story was exactly like mine. I'm like, shit, I don't know if I'm up for this thing. And I'm walking them through. And after I was done, I remember coming out of the session, I went to the kitchen. I just put my head down. I just started like crying like no tomorrow. My wife comes to me like, what? Are you okay? What the hell happened? My daughter was there. She's like, oh, she was like 4 years old at the time. And it was like 10 minutes. I couldn't take it. And then after that, I'm like, nothing is just, it was a very important area. And it felt like I needed to work through that too. And even just remembering that it was a very important moment. And this client to this day is with me. And actually, I'm collaborating with her too in a lot of ways. But I knew that was a huge shift for her. But that was also a huge shift for me too, because it made me realize I need to do more in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And that's what it is, right? Like we cannot be perfect, right? But it's that the willingness to like it's for me, that's kind of like integrity. Like people define integrity in different ways, right? But it's just that, not just doing the external work, not just doing the work with your clients. You have to do the work with yourself, right? And the more we do that, I think that the better we become as coaches, and here's the thing, like the interesting thing is there's like almost like two truths to that. And I think it's good for people to like, I mean, this is my view of it, right? That there's like almost like, sometimes there's two things that can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Because, once you become like really great at coaching, like you build your skills, I believe like you can coach anyone and like in any area of life and can help them transform. If there's like, of course, if there's a connection and the client is like willing to do the work, right? Right. And, so while I think that's really important, what you just shared, like we have to do the work. And, interestingly enough, like most of the stuff that we do with clients, it's like, it's like a reflection. It's like, I think, I don't know who it was, but someone said this, right? That the things that your clients struggle the most with, like those are the things that you struggle with, right?
Those are the clients you attract as well, interestingly. Those are the kind of clients I attract all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I think, and at the same time, like, I think like the beautiful thing is like, just coming back to that skill parts, right? Like develop those skills, because once you have those skills, you can just, your finances can be maybe, maybe you have 50,000 in your bank account, you can coach multimillionaires and billionaires, right? Because they will have problems that you can help them with. Sometimes you could be going through a divorce and you could transform someone's relationship. And the reason I think we want to point it out is because what you were saying doesn't negate that, but I think like sometimes it's also good to slow down to that. It doesn't mean that you always have to have your stuff together.
Yeah.
Right? But it just means that you're taking ownership of it. Right? Yeah. Because, if you're not, like sooner or later, like it just comes to above the water.
Yeah, and that's what I meant with that, is that you need to be battling it. Doesn't mean you need to be perfect in that area. We're, as human beings, we're all going to struggle in all of these areas that we're taking people through, and that's just understanding like how humans are in general. Like one of the areas I realized that because for the longest time, like looking at our parents, for example, it's very interesting for me. Like the whole journey, like I looked at my parents like they were like my heroes. Like they did everything and they did incredible things. They got us out of like life-threatening situations, from poverty and everything to all the way to the Western world. And I had a really amazing view. And I still remember we were sitting around, it was a barbecue day we were having, and my older brother we were all talking about like, what do we appreciate about each other? And we're all saying that, I think it was my younger brother said that, oh, I appreciate this, but I don't like this about my parents. And then he tried to override that. He's like, no, our parents are perfect. It is. And as soon as I thought that was very inauthentic of him saying that. And they're not perfect. They're human beings. And then I didn't say anything, but I really thought about this after a while. And I said, well, they were exactly like us. The way I'm struggling, they're struggled in all parts of their life. And when I started looking at them from that lens, I just looked at them like human beings. That actually improved my relationship so much more with them than trying to put them in this model that doesn't exist for us, like on this pedestal. And so it goes for everybody. When we look at millionaires or successful people, we kind of put them on a pedestal. And I think that's what it prevents us from supporting and serving them. It's like bringing them to the human level, because we all have the same challenges. But one is, and I think these points are really important, because before you even talk about business and marketing, if we're not on that journey of mastery, and this is kind of a self-reflection moment. If you're a coach listening to this, really ask yourself, what are you in this for? Because I've been in business for a little bit now. I've learned that there are easier ways to make money. Coaching is not the easiest way to make money. There are people that are making money much easier than
maybe we should talk about that.
If you're really after money, there are better ways. You can actually go and buy, and like some of my relatives are doing, I'm actually helping them think through some of this stuff. I'm like, because they're just interested in business. They're not really interested in the service the way we think about it. Like you can buy a laundromat. You can get for example, like an older laundromat, and it doesn't have any technology. Some old person is running it. Their kids are not interested in it. And you can go drive around, find those people, and get a loan from the government for the most of it, and just improve the process, improve their systems, get technology, and get better marketing and all that stuff. That it will take you a little bit of time, but it's actually a much easier process than building yourself up to that point where you can. And plus, these businesses have a credibility. They've run for 10, 20, 30 years before you even showed up. Like that might be a much easier way to build a business if you're building a business, but really doing a self-reflection. What are you in this for? Is it just business? Because if that's the only motivation you have, I especially for coaches, I don't think it's the kind of profession for you. It's a lot like doctors going into a healing path just for the sake of money, but they don't care to heal people. That to me is a huge, what do we call it? It's an ethical dilemma. So there's an ethical challenge here. Is that what are you going into this for? Is it really to serve people, support people? Yeah, in the process, you're going to build a business, everything, but that needs to be the primary motivation. And then the mastery and the skill sets, everything is around it. And that requires a lot of honesty.
I agree. And I think like the truth is, like, I think the process will filter you out if you're about the money, like, because I think even with doctors, right? Like if you're just about money, you're not going to survive the 6 years of the medical degree, right? And I think with coaching, that's happened to me. Like, I'll be honest, by the way, like, here's the thing. Sometimes it's okay, I think, to start with that. Like for me, it's about, making enough money that would support the family. And my wife lost her job at the beginning of my coaching career, because she was pregnant. So we knew, like, I knew, like, okay, now I need to replace 2 jobs and there's a baby coming, right? So it's just like a lot of pressure to make money. But here's the thing, right? When I shifted my focus, and I think this, for me, this happened probably at the end of the second year, or like halfway the second year, I shifted my focus from like money to mastery. And I thought, you know what? Even if it takes me 10 years, if I just focus on becoming really good, I'll become successful in this. And here's the beautiful thing, right? When I took my focus off money and I just focused on the process, I started making a lot more money. And it is because the money is a byproduct, right? It's a byproduct of how well you're doing, how many people you're helping, right? How impactful your work is, that professional service. When that professional service becomes better and you're doing it more often, right? You start seeing that more people will start saying yes.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it comes down to, like, and I struggled through this very similar process. Funny how our realizations are similar. So I struggled initially when I jumped into the thing. I was driving Uber at the time. And like, I had to battle between running the business and driving Uber and providing for my family constantly. And I didn't know how the business part would run. And one of my big realizations came in when I got a criticism from one of my family members. Like, you've been in this for a while. You're not making any money. You left your engineering career. This, that, and the other. It was very hurtful. But when I sat and reflected on that, I'm like, you know what? This matters to me. I will never not provide for my family, but this is connected to my soul. This is connected to who I am deep down. I don't care if it takes me 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I'm doing this. And that's exactly how I responded to the family members. I'm like, this is who I am. And that truly matters to me. And I want to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the industry, because a few of my clients over the past few years have come from coaching experiences that were not very good. And when I say not very good, they were scared to go in a coaching relationship. They were open to it. They knew that because they had read so many books, they knew that coaching is can be a very powerful path. For example, one of my clients, I was in Europe at the time. He reached out to me because he heard me on a podcast. I was in Sweden at the time. He booked a call with me. I was partially working. It was my sister's place. Partially, I was off too. So I was only working, I think, 3 days there. And he reached out to me. We did the whole. We started out, and I could tell he was really anxious. I'm like, tell me a little bit about, like, why do you want to do this? And he was very upfront. He's like, I'll be honest with you. I work with a coach, and he worked with me for a little bit. He promised that he would do this, that, and the other, but nothing happened. And we asked for our money back. He never did that in the process. And I don't know what happened on the coach's side, but at least from his perspective, he was very disappointed with the process. Now, obviously, people will not feel like they're getting the results. That's fine, but I could tell that there was a lack of integrity there on the other side. And to the point where we did the session, he got a lot out of it. He's like, holy shoot, this is coaching. His response was like, this is coaching. He's like, I did not go through coaching. Like, okay. He still had to invite his wife to the call because she went through this process with him, and she interviewed me too. And then when I talked to her, then they did the go ahead. At this point, to this day, I think it's been 2.5 years. I'm still coaching both of them, the wife and the husband. I'm actually meeting them in person soon too. And also recently, like, I just had a client who finished after a year. And one of the things that I heard that was really heartwarming for me was that she's like, you changed my perception of coaching. Like, the last time I went through coaching, it's like, I ain't telling anybody about this shit. That's how she talks. This time it's like, I'm really going to recommend, because ultimately it's like, we need to think about the industry as well, because it is a very new industry. People don't realize this has not been standardized. It's a lot like Uber when nobody knew about Uber and they were just making money before the government stepped into it. It was a lot like psychology before psychology became known, but it's a very new, everybody's calling themselves a coach, but they don't actually know. And even some of the coaches who are making money, sometimes I hear it. I'm like, how are you working with these clients? And I don't know how they've gone about it, but understanding that this impacts us all. Like, it impacts our clients. It spreads the message of coaching. And part of what I want to do with the podcast is really get people to understand that this is not just about me, you, it's about the whole industry, about serving and the ripple effect of that in the world. Because I truly believe that coaches have a very important part to play in this whole scheme of things around leadership, around self-awareness, around spirituality, around getting people to become aware. And it could be a really big thing if you really think about it. At least I have. So think of it from that perspective, because you're giving the industry a name every time you're in a session as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but I feel deeply about this part.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think, and by the way, like, I think, I haven't tried it, but like, Uber could be also another great way to pick up clients.
It was funny. So you know what made me realize I used to do coaching sessions during my Uber rides, but they didn't know. So the two things that helped me was when again, Rachel Liv and Steve Shalmer. I never asked permission to coach somebody. That was one problem. Second, I never offered. I never gave a proposal. I just hoped that they would kind of reach out to me. I would give them my contact information, but I would never really tell them that I was a coach.
Look, there's few things, right? And I think even some coaches that have good intentions, they set the wrong idea. Like, I'm not gonna mention names because some of them are well known, but basically when I was when I was like starting out the coaching journey, I would ask like, so one of the things I did early on, right? And this was like kind of selfish, and at the same time, I knew it would help people. But at the start of my coaching journey, I started interviewing coaches that I thought were doing well, right? Sometimes people would say no to me because they didn't know me, but other people, they were just saying yes, right? So I started interviewing different people, but some of them were not coaches, entrepreneurs, but a lot of them were coaches. And here's the thing, like the funny thing is I remember a lot of them saying like, oh, no, you don't need a certification, right? And I think like, it's not just about certification. I think like it's more about training, right? But I think like, unfortunately, like I see a lot of people say that, like even like coaches that are doing really well. And I think, it gives a it creates this misunderstanding, I think, to new coaches, right? That, oh, I don't need certification. So my thing is like, right, I think, yes, hell yes, like you need a certification, right? That's in fact, like, most certification are 6 months. There's some that are 1 year. There's some like where you can go deeper, where it's like 18 months, right? Where you can have multiple layers. Like if you think about it, like we talked about doctors and dentists, right? Like dentists study for 4 years, doctors 6 years, and that's just like your foundation.
Yeah.
As a coach, a certification is just the basic foundation. If you go to if you go through a good certification program, because I've helped a lot of coaches that, for example, don't have a certification, and they would like struggle in their business, like building their business. And I've coached coaches, right, and mentored them that have done certain certification programs, and they like their business grows a lot faster because they have that. Because a lot of the things we talked about, right, in a good coaching school, you're not just learning the theory, you're putting it into practice, you're getting feedback, from the facilitator, you're getting feedback from other coaches. So a lot of that is set up at the beginning, like you're doing those 40 hours. And so that's really crucial. In fact, like I would go a step further and say, like, if someone is really serious about building a profession, like becoming a professional coach with a good practice, earning good money, you should probably go like for ICF. ICF has like 3 levels, right? Like I think it's like ACC, PCC, MCC. But the thing is, like, if you go for PCC, and you don't just get that qualification, you have to prove to them that you're good at coaching. You have to send them at least 2 recordings, right? So at a very like basic level certification, and there's lots of good ones out there. And then the second level, I would say, like, if you're really serious, you probably should do ICF. And I don't have any affiliations with them, but I think like that's really important. And then the other thing is, I think, is expectations. I learned this also the hard way. Look, you can be a great coach and the client can have completely different expectations. One of my mentors told me this. He said, like, E equals E. Expectations equals experience. So if you're not clear about what the expectations are of the client, and that's why I think, like, personally, like, making it really simple, asking the client, like, what do you want? What would make our work really successful at the end of these 3 months, at the end of these 6 months coaching agreement? Like, what do you want to achieve? Just slowing down, right? Like, how does that look like? And it's not in our control, but it's just getting really clear. And then also setting up some clear agreements, which is often uncomfortable for new coaches, but setting them really clear agreements from the start. If people are not, I have an audio I can share with your community. You can, share it in your Facebook group. And, if people want it from the podcast, they just need to join your Facebook group. You can put it there. But there's a great audio, that Steve recorded. It's called Expectations versus Agreements, right? In fact, I learned this from a lot of experienced coaches like Rich and Steve. Like, what they do is they spend often 2 hours with people just discussing agreements at the beginning of a coaching agreement. So when someone has paid you the first session, you want to slow down and talk about agreements.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you don't do that, like, you might give the client, for example, some homework, or you might ask them to do some things and they don't do it. So we can set up agreements very clear, like, and again, agreements are co-created, right? It's not just agreements. Agreements are not just rules like, okay, you need to be on time, cancellation policy. There's a lot more around how do we get the most out of this experience? In fact, there's actually a great book that was written, I think, last year, at the beginning of last year, and it's called How to Get the Most Out of Coaching. And I think it's the only book ever written for the client, because most books are written for the coaches. And this book was actually, the book is written by someone that worked, I think, with Steve Chandler for over 10 years. Her name is Karen Davis. I actually interviewed her. Maybe we can connect the interview somewhere here. But Karen has a practice that does almost like 750,000 a year with no marketing, no social media. Just she lives what we talk about, and she's lived it for a decade. And the thing is she's written an incredible book that's written for the client. So this is a great book that you should read as a coach, and you could give it to clients so they actually understand how to get the most out of coaching. And here's the beautiful thing, right? When a client gets more out of coaching, guess what? They're more likely to renew with you. They're more likely to refer others to you. And this is the thing, almost every relationship, right? It's like there's two people in the relationship. It's the same in a marriage, right? You have to put 100% in, and the other person has to put 100%. But often in a coach-client relationship, the client doesn't often know how to get the most out of coaching. And a lot of coaches, including me, my first 2 years, probably even first 3 years, I didn't really know how to help the client become a good client, right? So that's again just some, I know we're talking about a lot of things, this, it would be worth it to probably watch this again, but really thinking about certification, probably continuous CPD, and that's how we together also raise the standards in this industry. Continuous CPD, and again, this might not be directly to your question, but that, you look at other industries, it's the same, right? Doctors have to do this. They have to do a certain amount of hours of CPD to keep their license, right? Yeah. And even though there's that, it's not regulated, you just need to set a certain standard for yourself, and that standard is really important. And then you get less of these things, right? Or where someone says and I'm not surprised, because, and by the way, it happens to everyone. It's happened to me where a client has said oh, I didn't enjoy it. And when I look back at it, in the beginning, probably I wasn't really good at coaching, but also years ago, right? It's come, the few times that has happened, it's come from not having really good expectations, not really having clear agreements.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought the agreement. I actually really love that part in the book that you gave me, the Crazy Good, which I really loved, by Steve Chandler. And he actually ended up doing a coaching session with one of my clients on that, which was really interesting. So I'd love to get that audio. I think that's a very important point, and it actually helps you with pretty much any relationship, not just coaching relationship.
Yeah. It can transform, the relationship between a husband and wife. Can transform relationship between an employee and an employer, right? It impacts a lot of relationships. But that's the beautiful thing again, that book, again, a must-have for coaches. I think it's one of the best coaching books.
Yeah, I love that book.
Crazy Good. It's these things that we can put into practice in our own life and in our practice, but also help our clients do it.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go into the certifications for a little bit. So it was very funny because when I got certified, and I'm a certified high performance coach, and then I also got a certification from Mind Valley, which is connected to ICF. So a bunch of their, I think you're 70 or 80% certified through ICF, but you still have to do another exam, which I haven't gone towards. But it's that ongoing journey of mastery. But when I first got certified, it was a week of training. When I went to in person, it was 5 days. And then we have our monthly calls and everything. Something didn't add up. I was I just went through 5 years of schooling to even start working as an engineer. I'm how could I build a career? And then the numbers were odd. I'm how could I make all this money working with people and giving them the kind of results that we're thinking about? How could I develop that fast? I get it. I've done a lot of the work and stuff, but there are skill sets that are emerging in here that I'm trying to figure it out. Especially if you ever go to these certification, even if whether you have a framework or not, when they put you in pairs, and they get you to ask questions. In the beginning, you're nervous. Like you don't even like you're just reading questions. There's no heart in it. There's not much because you're trying to figure out your own things. But it takes a certain amount of practice, feedback, and to give you and so what I realized then I heard Brendan Burchard say this like, listen, because I think he knows this. He's like, listen, this is one of those jobs where you're going to learn in your job. But the thing I think he missed a lot of it, even though he encourages feedback a lot, is having that community support, which I think is so important. So the way I look at certification is that's just your initial training. When you go out in the world to coach, it is challenging. Like you don't know what happened in a coaching session. You might feel like, and our feelings sometimes give us incorrect feedback when it comes to these. Sometimes we get out of a session, we're like, oh, I completely bombed. And then from a client perspective, that's not what happened. And then sometimes we're like, oh, I did amazing, but that might not have been a really good session. And you don't know how to give yourself feedback yet. And so really even if you go through certification, which definitely I recommend because this is a mastery journey, but even if you go through a certification, be around other coaches, consistently talk with not just one or two coaches because they'll have their biases, but multiple coaches, at least 5, 6, 7, 10 coaches that will give you perspective on what they're trying, what's working, what's not working. People who are actually trying this, not people who are theoretically learning it, because a lot of the people in certification, they're learning it. And that's what we're trying to do in coaching master community. That's why we want it to be a middle ground in the industry where it becomes sort of an incubator for coaches, not just on the business sense, but in terms of their skill sets, is that let us give you feedback. And actually feedback is very difficult. We've had to encourage our coaches to come, because they don't even give each other feedback. So I've had to go back because we've created a system around it. Like, how come we're not getting the feedback? Because there's a system we have around it whenever somebody and then we talk about it. It's like, oh, I didn't know how to give this person feedback because they didn't want them to be offended. I'm like, if you can't give another coach a feedback, then you're definitely not giving your clients feedback. You're definitely not challenging them. So there's a lot in there. So it takes a certain amount of, and that's why I think Rich Husband says, if you want to be a great coach, coach. And to add to that is constantly give yourself feedback in the process and get that feedback. But if you're not doing that, it's very hard for you to improve the process. And you can have the best sales process, you can have a great marketing process, but it's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, I think it's a book written by a guy called Erickson, right? Like he talked about 10,000 hours. I think it's a book called, right? And that's the thing. Like, if while you're talking, I look at the calculator. If we take 10,000 hours, we divide by 40. So let's just say 40 hours on average. Like most coaches, let's be honest, they don't coach 40 hours.
They don't coach for it. I don't even coach 40 hours if I looked at it.
But let's just say, like, imagine if you're coaching 40 hours. So even if some of it is coaching, some of it's reading books, watching coaching videos, but it's like focus, like what you said, like focus on coaching. And we divide that by 40, right? Look at this, what we're getting here. Like 10,000 divided by 40 gives us 250 weeks. Let's say if you work 40 weeks, so you take 3 months off every year, right? That still gives you 6.225. That means like 6.25 years. So an average coach actually won't take 6.25 years. It will take probably 10 years. And this is really important to understand, is because I think we hear this sometimes, like, people talk about the word mastery, but unfortunately, like, there are programs out there that are 1 week. There are programs out there that are 2 weeks, and it's like at the end of the program, you're a certified master coach, which is complete BS. To get it really straight, right? Like it will take you at the minimum of 6 years, 6 to 10 years to become really masterful at coaching. And here's the thing, I'm still on that journey, right? In fact, like I just signed up, and it's starting in 2 weeks, for a 2-year certification program that goes really deep into masculine psychology, right? And it goes, like, I've studied a lot of different models, like positive psychology, and I've done a coaching diploma, and this approaches it from a very different angle.
Yeah.
Right. It looks like, so the thing is this, right? Like, and the reason I'm doing that as well, and this is not about me, but it's like, there's this commitment to constantly getting better.
Yeah.
right? And that will pay off the biggest. Like I've created over 7 figures in my business, and I know you're doing quite well. The thing is, like, you look at coaches that are doing really well. There's not like they're not doing some fancy like magical stuff. It's really like just coming back to the fundamentals and getting really good at it. And we can see this also, by the way, in other sports, right? Like you look at Kobe Bryant, you look at most people that are extraordinary at what they do. It's not that they're doing sexy things, like fancy things all the time. Like it's just the basic. And unfortunately, the basic things, like sometimes they get boring. He would practice 8 hours while the average NBA player would practice 4 hours. Now, I'm not saying like you need to like do that. You don't need to be like, unless that's what you desire, right? But I think it's really clear to get like, we need to get clear on what we want, and then get clear on like what's the price we're willing to pay.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't say I want, a really successful coaching practice, and then not, if you're not willing to pay the price for it. Yeah. Right. And by the way, that doesn't mean you need to like constantly hustle, you need to sleep 4 hours, because that's not going to help. You can, sleep 8 hours, you can have a good work structure, but you need to put the work in. And a big part of what we talk about, the work, is what we, the things that we mentioned: coaching, getting feedback on coaching, being part of groups like, the Coaching Mastery community. It's like, it's that, like, it's living it, it's breathing it.
Yeah.
Right.
I completely agree. There are so many other points that we didn't even get to. Like I wanted to get to. There's just this one. Maybe this will be a thought I'll share with the audience, and maybe you can quickly reflect on it. Is that one of the things I've learned, and I talk to a lot of coaches. Coaches get too boggled up in personal development. Life is not just about personal development books. Like a lot of, like, I know this is one of the reasons why I loved coaching, because it's an ongoing learning journey about yourself and your place in the world, your place in this universe, in this cosmos. So knowing that, I think coaches need to expand their perspective a little bit beyond personal development books and even business books, and go into history, go into philosophy, go into and wherever you have interest, go into art. Go travel more, go see places, go, like, unless your perspective is expanded, it's actually hard to, because there's a certain amount of wisdom that needs to come to even ask the right question in the moment. Because you could say, well, this is a very powerful question, but who is asking the question matters a lot. Your experience matters a lot. Your thought process matters a lot. But what are your thoughts about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think, like, to just read biographies, right? Like, look at people. Like, I mean, I studied, as part of a group I'm part of, we studied the life of Winston Churchill, and it has so much impact, like, on how I was thinking about my business and my life, right? So you learn a lot. And again, like, I'm not into basketball, but I've studied, like, the lives of, like, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and there's documentaries. So the thing is, when you look at it, different industries, you learn a lot of things. And the beautiful thing is, like, we can look at what they were doing. You can look at, like, what Djokovic was doing, right, to become number one. You can look at, like, Kobe Bryant, and you can bring a lot of that mindset into your work, right? Because again, it's like, coaching has some fundamental things that are unique to coaching, right? But if you really think about it, right, everything we talked about, you can apply it to basketball. Right? If you're just shooting by yourself, you're not going to become, an incredible 3-point, like shooting 3 points by yourself. If you have a coach with you, you get feedback on that, right? You record it. And by the way, this is what some of the best actually do. They record it, they watch it back, and they're like, oh, I need to maybe, like, change, the way I'm throwing this, right? So it applies across the board. And so I personally love that. Again, like, biographies, looking at, different industries, and you can do it in a way that's fun for you. Like, you can watch, there's documentaries on Netflix about Serena and Venus Williams, really useful for coaches. There's documentaries about Michael Jordan. There's books written about Kobe Bryant, right? And so again, like, just going there and sometimes looking at completely different things, right? You can look at how teachers, run, how some great teachers think. So yes, 100%. Like, I think when we look at that, it shifts our perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because you look at Winston Churchill, like the guy like went through some incredible challenges.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
you know,
I definitely agree there. And like some weird places that I've learned, like I like even like being present in your life, like it's not even like studying, like your kids will teach you a lot of stuff. Like my daughter the other day is like, Baba, you're yelling at me. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you how we do these things. It's like, no, you've been yelling at me the whole week. I'm like, I have. And he's like directly challenging me. I had to sit down. I'm like, okay, so when did you hear me? Oh my God. He's like, this time. I'm like, oh shit, I thought I was present and aware. Clearly not. That moment taught me a lot, because I was like, I had to go to her level and talk to her like a human being, rather than no, she's not as experienced as me. But like little things in life, like I've learned a lot by studying empires, like the rise of the Persian Empire, the Islamic Empire, all these. Like, what did the leaders do? What happens? What, like the autobiography of Carl Jung? Like, how did he grapple with these questions? Maslow, all these guys did very into, like, Zen Buddhism has taught me so much about like how do you interact with things. Sufism and Islam, like how do we think about the cosmos and universe? Like the debates, like I love debates more than anything else, between existential debates. It teaches you what people really grapple with in the day-to-day life. And like unless that expands, like I think it goes towards mastery in a lot of ways. That and maybe you don't have interest in that area, but even as a coach who wants better human beings in the world, I think it kind of comes as a part of the responsibility of this thing, is like, how can you help people go towards that if you're not grappling with these difficult questions yourself?
yeah. I think it's about, being intentional. I call it like having a study diet, right? I think like one of the mistakes that I made early on, and I think I see a lot of coaches make, is just they just basically read books, listen to books without there's no like intentional, there's no like, oh, this year I'm going to increase these skills, or this year I'm going to read books, and there's no specific intention behind it. Unfortunately, a lot of times, like now, it's like people are posting at the end of the year, like, oh, I finished this many books. I've like one guy, I love the guy, but he finished like 200 books. Like, and he's like, I'm like, what the hell? Like, how much did you really get out of that? Right. And the thing is, like, sometimes it just becomes like a number to like, and it's like a number to complete.
It's a number. It becomes a numbers game. We do that a lot, and like a lot of the best books, like I've read them 2, 3, 4 times. Like I don't like constantly reading new books. And like the Motivation Manifesto I'm reading, and I've read it 3 times. Steve Chandler's book, I read it two times already, and I want to read one.
I think the distinction is, right, it's like to go deep and not like to go a mile deep, is and only an inch wide. Look, it's fine. Like you can learn about a lot of great things, right? Like it's sometimes like we get, I think this is the thing with personal development, where it's like, it's the easier thing, right? Like it feels nice, but often like going deeper is sometimes more boring. You go like, okay, I learned about positive psychology, and now let me read 5, 10 books on this one topic and go deeper. Like you learned about high performance, go deeper, right? And it's like you read a lot of books on the same topic, your thinking develops. There's different level of thinking that comes, and your work becomes more impactful. So this is also really important to understand for coaches. Like CPD, like doesn't mean, you sign up for an NLP course and then a positive psychology course and then, high performance. Like if you just keep doing that, and by the way, that was me, right? I signed up for all these different CPDs. Like there's a mindfulness course, and there was some benefit, but the benefit wasn't as much when I stopped and I said, you know what, I'm going to go deeper on one thing, right? And so it doesn't mean like you stick with one thing for like forever, but you can like say, okay, 6 months, everything I'm reading, I'm watching, I'm listening is all related to one topic. Like you could go like neuroscience and you go deeper, right? And that's a lot more impactful, right? And, again, being intentional, creating like a study diet, right? Not just like letting everything and anyone like just come in.
And also there's the other component of that is the implementation, because we want to also, part of it is like conceptual knowledge. Part of it is like a lot of what we do with the clients is helping them. For example, I help them work through emotions. Now there was a like I've been dealing with challenges of how to process emotions and do for like 6+ years now. And I remember there were times like there was a time where I wasn't working for like 3-4 months, and my wife would go to work and come back, and she would be like, "What did you do today?" Like, I was crying half the day. She's like, "Okay, tell me." I was walking myself through visualizations and to go deeper into the areas of resentment and all those things that I was holding on to. And that was a hard process. Like, it would drain the hell out of me. It gave me an experience of what would it be like with clients much before that. And one of the areas that my clients come to me is around emotions, because and I never thought of it from a client's perspective, but I needed that because I was suppressing a lot of that shit. But yeah, we've talked about so many that whoever is listening to this, you need to listen to this like 3-4 times and implement some of these areas, and especially the book recommendations that you gave. Amazing books. Like, these are must read books for coaches. Some of them I haven't even read, so I'm going to read them myself. And but so we asked these 3-4 questions, like more kind of like quickly going into them, not just explaining them. Just like what would you say is your favorite book, like, of all time? I know that's a difficult question for a lot of coaches.
That's a difficult question. Favorite book of all time. Well, I think when it comes to coaching, it's probably The Prosperous Coach, okay. and very close to that is Crazy Good.
Crazy Good. Cool. I love both of those books. So what do you think separates a successful coach from a coach that gives up, is not successful, or whatever?
Well, it's this formula, right? Like, I actually wrote it down here. Like, look, everything we talked about, you can watch this video a bunch of times. You can read all the book we talked about. That's theory. What makes the difference is taking theory, being obsessed with taking theory, putting it into practice. Like, mastery only happens as a result of practice continuously, right? And that's when you get to that. So it's like theory, practice, mastery. So it's being really obsessed with putting it into practice. And that's going to be imperfect practice. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to screw up. It's that willingness for like, the willingness to be messy, willingness to screw up. But it's that obsession. Like, so that's the question I want to leave everyone with. It's like, you listening to this, just write down like, okay, here are my takeaways, and here's what I'm putting into practice. If this was like a workshop, if we were in a room, I would just slow down and get people to share what are your takeaways, what are 2 or 3 things that you're going to put into practice. And I love this analogy that one of my mentors used to use. After every training, he said, what are your 3 actions? And he said, make your first action like the first Pringle you take out of the Pringle box. That like if the Pringle box is halfway, it's hard. Like, you're like trying to get that Pringle, but the first one is always easy. And that first action, make it like an action that you can take today after listening to this. And that could just literally be just like ordering one book, or that could be like you grab your calendar and say, you know what, every week, 10 to 12 on a Sunday, I'm going to study coaching. But you put one thing into practice. The moment you do that, you're taking action straight away. You're taking the theory into practice. So that's, I think, like the thing that makes the biggest difference, because it's not about how talented you are, how intelligent you are. Like, I'm definitely not the most intelligent person or the most talented, right? But I'm just putting it into practice all the time.
Yeah, I love that. What are some of your hobbies? What do you do for fun?
Oh, I have a lot of hobbies. I love playing football.
Do you mean the real football? The American football?
Soccer, yeah. I love soccer. While reading is also part of my profession. I love reading in general. Used to play a lot of chess. I love games in general. Poker was a game for me. Shooting games, football games. Anything to do with a game, and for me, like, business has become a game. But yeah, I can enjoy like playing games for hours and hours.
Yeah, that's the sense. I used to play a lot of games, and there was a point when I kind of got out of my own misery around coaching. I started looking, and I'm like, oh, this is a lot like the games that I played. It's just as fun if I look at it that way, and it's challenging, and it's helping me grow in so many cool ways, and it's serving people too in this process. But last question: where do you think the coaching industry is going?
Wow. Well, I think it's growing exponentially, and I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And naturally, like, I don't know if it will be regulated at some point, but, I think there will be a good separation between, like kind of like people that are really good or great at what they do and people that are just kind of like coming in. I don't know like if there's a good example for that in a different industry, but I think like there will be like, a good separation. And again, like people like yourself, like myself, like we're committed to raising the standard in this industry. But yeah, I think it will keep growing, and I'm happy with that, because it's benefiting to so many people. Number coaches are changing their own lives because of this, and then they're helping other people with it.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Definitely that I think the stand, as more people are coming into it, especially those who are committed, they're going to outpace most other coaches. Like I remember starting out in 2015, there were quite a few coaches who didn't do anything with it, or they with the business side of things. But even in the coaching, like they've called themselves a coach, but they haven't done anything in the process. And many of them have given up. Out of the, I think, 600 plus coaches that I started out with, a very small percentage, maybe 10%, have built actual businesses and have moved forward. Very few of them. And that seems to be the statistics you're getting. Very few coaches actually make money. And that's true because very few coaches are actually committed, not because they can't make money in the process. But I just want to thank you, Siawash, for jumping on here. Sorry, we went a little bit over too, but this was so interesting. I could have gone for another 3 hours, to be honest, because there's so much in there to unpack. And maybe Siawash will be kind enough to come back. We can work through some of the other areas. For those who are listening to it in our Facebook group, please share what was your biggest insight, and the question that Siawash asked, what's your commitment moving forward? Not just the insight, but what's your commitment? What are you going to put into action in your coaching business, in your life? We talked about a broad array of things. And also, if you're listening to it on podcasts, YouTube, or other places, please make sure you share this with any coaches that you think will be served by this conversation, because there are a lot of coaches that need to hear this. And just know that our intentions are to support you, to help you understand that this is an actual career. It's an industry. It's a professional world where you can actually serve people, and the effect of it is exponential. So if you want to be some part of something really big, then stop dabbling. Even if you're working part-time in it, go towards mastery, go towards learning the process, learning the craft, and really going into that service mindset and really understanding what it takes to build this kind of business. But lastly, Siawash, where can people find you?
Good question. Right now the easiest place is Facebook.
Okay.
You can find me on LinkedIn right now. Somehow that got disabled. Long story, but part of the work we do. Crazy things happen. Websites in rebuilding at the moment. So yeah, Facebook. There's free stuff on there on Facebook. I have 2 podcasts actually that I run. One is called Talking About Coaching, and where we just answer all the questions that qualified coaches have. But yeah, that's it. There's a lot of stuff there on social media, but usually you can find it all from Facebook. Yeah. Again, like, have fun, we need you. We need more coaches that are committed. I love what you said there, this is it. I think it can bring so much, good to your family, to yourself, and through you, to the world.
Yeah. I definitely, like, especially as I've worked with more and more clients, I've realized there's a huge need within families, within organizations, within communities for something like this. And we need more good coaches. And there is no shortage of clients right now. So whoever is telling you that, they're probably coming from their own scarcity point of view. There are a lot of people that need it, and they can actually pay for it too. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for showing up, and make sure you guys like and share this post and share your thoughts with us. And we will see you next week, same time. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.